Hey everyone, welcome back to the Goody Reader Radio Show. My name is Michael, and I'm joined today by editor of GoodyReader.com, Mercy Pilkington. Mercy, how are things?
I'm great. How are you?
I am tremendously swamped with all of the big news that has come out today.
I'm sure you are. It was quite a day for some publishing news.
Yeah, I mean, outside of Amazon releasing new devices or Kobo releasing a fleet of devices, today I guess was probably the most newsworthy day. And let's get right into it. Kobo and Sony have reached a landmark distribution agreement for eBooks. So if you are a Sony user and have purchased ebooks using the Sony e-reader, maybe a Sony phone or a Sony branded tablet, or even if you have used the Sony Reader app for PC or Mac, any purchases you've made from Sony are automatically going to be transferred to Kobo starting in March. This is huge news, and I mean, there's a lot of facets to this that were not mentioned in a press release. That the press releases are usually don't give a lot away, very neat, very polished, a few key quotes from some executives, but they certainly don't know the whole story. Before I really get into it, Mercy, what are your thoughts overall of this?
Well, of course, I'm here in the U.S. I'm also in a rural part of the U.S. where we're lucky to have a bookstore, let alone a lot of widespread ebook use. And so I have to honestly say I could not name you 5 people who've used the Sony store. I'm sure they're out there, and I applaud Sony for their innovative beginnings in ebook distribution. They were a huge part of the ebook revolution, the digital revolution we're experiencing, and I mean, great to them. I'm really happy that they decided to ink this deal with Kobo because I can't say enough about the company. They are pioneers in getting ebooks into the hands of people worldwide. And so I can't think of 2 companies better suited to work together than the original pioneers versus the people who are actually bringing ebooks around the world.
Okay, so let's get into the semantics of the matter. This is only for Canada and the US. Sony will do business as usual in Australia, in Germany, the UK, and the rest of Europe. So if you're a European listener, this Kobo deal with Sony does not affect you at this time. Sony tried to make it clear to me when they gave us an exclusive interview that it's business as usual. Customers in Europe have nothing to worry about for the near future. So whether this Sony and Kobo deal works out really well, then Kobo just takes over all of Sony's stuff. It remains to be seen. There's also something to be said about Sony sponsoring the Pottermore website and being instrumental in the distribution of the Harry Potter books. What's going to happen to that? No one knows. No one else is actually talking either about the financial details about this. If how much did this deal cost Kobo and Sony? It's the type of thing where no one's really divulging specific figures. Obviously, it looks like Kobo had to pay Sony money for this, but no one has been forthcoming in the details. Now, Mercy, you're familiar with Smashwords as an independent distribution platform
Mm-hmm.
for authors, and one
Right.
of the avenues of self-publishing has been with Sony.
Right. Absolutely.
So what does this deal mean for self-publishers, for Sony, for Kobo, and so on?
People have long kind of disparaged Smashwords as just kind of a catch-all garbage bin for all kinds of indie content without really realizing that Smashwords serves a very vital purpose in that they are not just a self-publishing platform, they are a distribution platform. So, theoretically, an author who really just does not have the time, energy, or know-how to sit down and distribute their book themselves to Amazon, Nook, Sony, Flipkart, Diesel, all these other places, including Apple, they can send it one time to Smashwords. Now, Smashwords will make its portion of the sale basically staying in operation by taking a small portion of each sale from all of those retail sites. That's why a lot of authors choose to now go with, they can upload to Amazon themselves, they can upload to Barnes& and Noble, Kobo quite easily, and then kind of leave it to Smashwords to handle the ones that are not as readily available to all authors. For example, Flipkart, which is the number one retailer right now in India. That's huge. If you're trying to get your book in front of readers in India, which English is one of the official languages, and quite a number of people read in English, Smashwords is an excellent way to do that. Unfortunately, it's very easy to send your book to Kobo on your own, but not quite so simple with Sony. And so a lot of people who've been relying on Smashwords to distribute the book to Sony for them may think now, I don't really need Smashwords to do that for me because I can send it to Kobo. So I really hope this does not have an impact on Smashwords' business, since they also only distribute to Canada and the United States through Sony.
Okay, actually spoke with CEO of Smashwords, Mark Coker, and he had told me the following: the actual EPUB files Smashwords delivers to Sony will not transfer to Kobo, but the digital identifiers will. And these identifiers, ISBN numbers, metadata, will allow Kobo to provide access for Sony customers in their Kobo libraries. If Kobo does not have the book, then that book will not transfer. So if you have just published to Sony but didn't publish to Kobo, those books will not transfer. Incidentally, if you purchase a lot of magazines, graphic novels through Sony, those will not transfer as well. Finally, Sony developed a new EPUB 3 kids section in their store last year. It was basically enhanced ebooks. So ebooks with video, audio, a lot of multimedia formats. A lot of them were not self-published, but they were done through proper publishing channels. Those books will not go over either. So basically, any book that doesn't exist on the Kobo ecosystem will not transfer. And so what this means is that you should back this up locally on your computer to ensure that you can transfer it to other devices. Sony does use a stock Adobe DRM solution. So if you have another EPUB capable device, so like a Kobo e-reader, like a Barnes & Noble e-reader, and so on, you could load these books on it. And same with, you could just install the Sony reading app. The Sony e-reading app will continue to function, but once March comes around, you will no longer be able to actually buy books anymore through Sony. And one of the more interesting things I was wondering was, and Sony actually addressed this, was if I walk into a Best Buy in the States, or if I walk into an electronics store and I see like a Sony e-reader sitting on a shelf, the likelihood of that is next to nil. But if I'm in Canada, and Canada still sells Sony e-readers in almost every major electronics store, if I walk into the store, there's going to be nothing on the retail packaging that mentions Kobo. And I was kind of wondering about that, because will there be a sticker there that says powered by Kobo, or 4.5 million books from Kobo? Sony said that there'll be no Kobo branding on any of their retail packaging. So I thought that was very interesting.
It is actually that it seems like they're aligning themselves with a powerful platform that can distribute these books, that can seamlessly take over for their dedicated customers, with hopefully very little disruption to the reading experience and to the purchasing experience. So why wouldn't they want to go ahead and say, hey, we're working with Kobo and we're proud of it? So interesting.
Yeah, so that was probably the biggest news item of the day. I've reached out to Kobo for comments, but they have since not been able to respond to my pleas of questions, concerns, and things like that as a press time. So if you want to know more about this Sony and Kobo deal, we have two articles on the front page. The one that I wrote was called "What the Sony and Kobo ebook deal means for readers," and I got a lot of quotes from Sony and from Smashwords that respond to the article. Hopefully tomorrow I'll be able to write another one with Kobo's perspective as well as Overdrive's perspective, because Overdrive, under their they provide tablets and e-readers to schools and libraries. They have their list of recommended devices, and Sony has been at the forefront of their most recommended device. So will that change now that Sony is ultimately becoming irrelevant now? We're going to reach out and find all this information out. Mercy, Do you have any news to report today?
I do. I spent a lot of time this week talking to David H. Rothman, one of the original founders of a site that you and I are very familiar with, and that's Teleread, talking about his new goal of an endowment for libraries. Basically, libraries, as we know, are facing situations of crisis proportions. And an article that Rothman had actually written very recently indicated that the average per capita spending for libraries in the last year that we have information on, which was 2010, was a little over $4 per citizen. And when you get into locations like Mississippi, which is in the deep south, that number drops to just over $1 per citizen that libraries were given to spend on content, operating expenses, and things like that. And so David is working on an endowment because he's kind of disillusioned with the Digital Public Library of America. And people who've been following the news of that entity that came out last year may understand that the DPLA, as it's called, is really lose purpose. It's kind of shifting into more of an academic purpose and an archival purpose, where it's a very noble project to digitize these archive records and these private collections from around the country, but they're all of historic or academic importance. And so the DPLA, with the word public right there in the name of it, is not going to serve the average citizen. And so people like David and someone named Jim Duncan, who is the executive director of the Colorado Library Consortium, they've been really working on, it's great to have a DPLA in the US, much like the Digital Library of Norway or different programs in other countries. But what do we have for the average citizen? How are we going to get ebooks in front of people when we're already spending barely $1 per person in some parts of the country? And that's annual. And so he's working on an endowment. He's really calling on basically just saying the super rich, as he called them. And he cited a quote from Forbes magazine that indicated that the top 400 of the wealthiest people in America account for $2 trillion of wealth. And when you look at a situation in 2010 where a grand total of just over $10 million was spent on libraries and content, it really shows the discrepancy between where wealth is going and how it's not impacting libraries. And he's working to change that. He'd like to see an endowment that is funded by private citizens who have the wealth and means to do so, but while giving some measure of control to the government so that we still have this transparency and that we still make sure that that endowment is spread equally, not just among your major cities and their massive library systems, but also the rural libraries, like he mentioned in Mississippi.
So it all sounds fine and well to have like a national digital library. It doesn't seem to be working very much in the States, from the sounds of it, but some countries have been able to make it work. Norway, more specifically.
Right. I think one of the factors, and of course, I speak as only someone who has lived outside of the US, but has, of course, obviously not lived everywhere. I think the problem is what we still run into in the US, and a lot of people are not aware of this dynamic, is that by having 50 separate states with 50 separate governments in place, we don't share across state borders. We have federal funding for certain things, but we also have very specific state funding. So a library in Georgia and a library in Arkansas do not share, not readily, and especially not in funding. And so I understand that the DPLA is a massive undertaking and it's a very noble cause. That is basically saying we need a national clearinghouse. There are slave records and records of these transactions, of these historical documents housed in private libraries in Arkansas that nobody can access. And so it's really important that people in Nebraska can see them if they wanted to. Right now, they're just being stored securely to protect them, but they're not being used. And so I understand the undertaking the DPLA is working towards. But at the same time, Rothman is right. It's not going to affect the day-to-day lives of people who are already struggling from a lack of bookstores, a lack of libraries that are open to meet the public's needs, and a lack of access to books.
So this kind of goes, most people listening to the show are likely familiar with Overdrive as being one of the premier distribution channels to libraries. they're a company that's basically for profit. They're not really concerned about providing everybody in the U.S. with equal access to ebooks, whereas the DLPA is. When I mentioned the library in Norway, they actually do something on like a country level that we actually talked about before the show started. Whereas the publishers actually get paid through the government; they're not actually paid through the libraries, which I find is very compelling.
It is, and unfortunately, it's just not a system that people are going to vote for or get behind in the US because there you've got the government supporting private entities, for public access to things. And so that unfortunately is going to be a little too socialist for a lot of American citizens. That's just not how our government is set up here. Um, Luckily, though, one of the entities that could actually be a nice go-between right now is our academic libraries at the public education level, because those are actual libraries, but they are supported by federal and state tax dollars. And so that would be a situation where the citizens could say, well, of course the government's going to support the libraries, support the publishers, because they're already supporting publishers through textbook purchases, book purchases for school libraries, and things like that. I do love the work that Overdrive and 3M are doing. They are making ebook access possible to people. They are making libraries relevant again in a climate where libraries, unfortunately, are losing their esteem in the eyes of citizens as, why do I need this? Why do I need to go to a building when I can just hit instant click on Amazon and have my book in 2 days as a Prime member? I can borrow ebooks. I can stream movies. Why do I need my library? And so I applaud 3M and Overdrive for the work that they're doing to make it possible for libraries to keep up. But like you said, those are private companies and those are not free. They are for profit. They have to be. Otherwise, they would lose their business as well, and we would still have the ebooks. So unfortunately, it's not something that a lot of libraries can afford.
Okay, so one actual thing that you mentioned, you kind of touched on it with talking about Amazon Prime as being an option that a lot of people, pursue. It's most certainly to get a free ebook every month. Let's talk a little bit about Amazon's self-publishing platform. Mercy, a lot of people may not know this, but you're a writer yourself, and
I am.
you have used a lot of distribution systems out there for your books, and you're among illustrious company where you, Hugh Howey, Jennifer Weiner, and a bunch of other people who are the seminal writers of our time. They sell a lot of books, but they all kind of agree that the bulk of self-published books are sold on Amazon. They're not actually being sold on Nook Press or Kobo Writing Life or even the Apple iBookstore.
Right. And actually, Hugh Howey had mentioned this a couple weeks ago when we talked about it in our last podcast together about his kind of lashing out at the Authors Guild and Scott Turow for not supporting authors more and for really kind of seeming like the Authors Guild is in bed with the publishing industry, the traditional industry, and that they constantly attack Amazon. And it was Howie who pointed out most self-published authors make the majority of their income through royalties through Amazon. And that's just a dynamic. Amazon sells more ebooks. But there are a handful of authors who have found that they sell more books on Smashwords than all other platforms combined, or more books on Nook because of the genre they write. And there are definitely different demographics that we have seen are buying Nook devices or Nook ebooks versus Amazon. And so it depends on what you write and what your target audience would be as to where you want your books listed. But certainly Amazon, it's no secret, they're selling more ebooks than anyone else. And that filters down to the indie authors too, not just the traditionally published authors.
Yeah, I find it very interesting that a lot of authors tend to bash Amazon, and we go to a lot of publishing conferences all over the world on a yearly basis, and we would be remiss if a publishing conference did not have a session or two to bashing Amazon.
Yes.
It seems to be like a publishing conference can't even get going unless it has like a few roundtables devoted to hating on Amazon. And from a self-publishing point of view, I mean, the bulk of sales stem from that platform, your order, selling tangible books through CreateSpace. So if I buy one of your books, Mercy, through CreateSpace, it actually gets printed in a real book and sent to me,
Mhm.
and it's like buying a real book. Or I could just buy the Kindle edition, and so yeah, I always get discouraged when people bash Amazon. I mean, they're a company, obviously, that's like for profit. They're an online bookseller, amongst other things, but the bulk of self published titles are sold through Amazon. So I fail to see how everyone starts to really like hate on it. And then I start to wonder, and a lot of people, they hate on it because they get more people attending their sessions. The more people attending their
Mhm.
sessions, the more money that the speakers get. If you're a speaker and you say, at my last conference, it was a crowded house when I talked about Amazon. So let me speak at your
Mhm.
convention. Oh yeah, my fees are like 10 grand, like a speech and things like that. So it becomes almost like a vested self-interest to hate on Amazon because that speaker could actually make a viable living hating on them.
Right. But and truthfully, a lot of the events that we cover are aimed at the publishing industry, not just the authors. And so I think it makes me laugh. I probably shouldn't laugh. But the thing is, around 2006 or so, a very nice young man named Jeff Bezos went and had great meetings at all the CEOs of all the great publishing houses and said, I have an idea to help you sell more books. And they jumped on it. And now they're sorry they did. And that's the problem. That's what's actually selling tickets to these speaking events is the publishers who are trying to now figure out a way to get away from him. Unfortunately, they made him who he is. And I love to envision all these great people who love to bash Amazon who are probably sitting on their computers at 1 o'clock in the morning. It's not internet porn they're looking at. They're ordering free shipping items. And so they're getting the Amazon deal of the day with their Amazon accounts. I would love for someone, I shouldn't say this, I would love for someone to hack Amazon's records and see which of the great publishing houses all of their executives have Amazon accounts because they just do it better than anyone else right now. And, I'm sorry, the publishers made them who they are. The publishers wanted another way to put books in front of people and to sell them on the cheap, and they found it by working with Amazon. And now they're trying to distance themselves and find another way to work without having to meet the demands of the most powerful retailer online right now.
Is it possible though? I mean, all the time we are regaled with press releases on a daily basis from startups saying they want to be the next Netflix of ebooks. They
Mm-hmm.
want to be the next Amazon. They want to create this like utopian global ebook distribution network. You hear about them once and then you never hear about them again. So is it viable 5 years, 10 years from now for Amazon to not be the biggest digital bookstore in the world?
I would not say bookstore in 5 years. I would say that, yes, I see it possible that Amazon can stretch itself too thin. And I think when the day comes that they start splitting into different entities, I think that's going to be the day that we start to see them break apart. Barnes and Noble did a great job since the 70s when they actually became Barnes and Noble and bought up different stores and had their flagship stores. Basically, they kept themselves very small, unfortunately. And then when they tried to immediately grow through a college division, a self publishing platform, an e reader platform, it was too fast and they couldn't keep up. And so we saw some change there. At the same time, we saw Borders who didn't adapt at all, who decided, you know what, this is stupid. We're going to do it our way. We're going to do what we've always done and we're not going to change. And they fell apart as well. And so I think Amazon's only real takedown would be if they ever spread themselves too thin, which, every day, like you said, we get another press release telling us another thing that Amazon's doing now. So I kind of have to ask myself, when is it going to be too big? When are they not going to be able to keep all of these plates in the air that they're juggling? But right now they're doing it right, and they know what they're doing. And so I don't see that day happening in 5 or 10 years. Now, what I do see happening is possibly them abandoning different entities that they sell through. So I think, if the day ever did come that they had to get smaller, they would simply return to what made them great in the first place, which is books. They might abandon some of these things that may not sell as well. Right now, of course, we knew that the Kindle devices were not a moneymaker. They were simply a tool to sell more books. So they were basically selling them at cost. Again, that's a brilliant strategy. And so if Amazon ever did get to be too big, I see them easily saying, well, that didn't work for us, and just closing up shop in one or two smaller areas to strengthen themselves again.
Okay, so one final bit of Amazon news, and something that we haven't really talked about, but it could contribute to your argument of spreading themselves too thin. Kindle Worlds, and it
Mm-hmm.
was a fan fiction platform that had launched last year, and they've actually secured the rights of we spoke earlier about Hugh Howey of his Silo trilogy, or I think it's 4 books
Mm-hmm.
now, but they have the rights for
Mm-hmm.
that. And Hugh Howey himself is actually writing fan fiction for Kurt Vonnegut's universe. A little bit of
Right.
news came that they have ironed out an agreement with Hasbro to have
Mm-hmm.
G.I. Joe fan fiction. Yo, Joe.
Exactly. It's about time. He turned 50 years old today, so why not? Why not let him have some stories? I'm not envisioning any author I know who sits around secretly writing GI Joe fan fiction.
Is there anybody? Do you know what I mean? Like,
Exactly. But now that they've opened the avenue there, and you could get paid for this, you can legitimately publish it as opposed to just posting it on free reading sites or free fan fiction sites. Now that you can actually publish your story and get paid for it, I think it's timely. We are right now involved in a lot of military operations. We have a lot of people in our country who are related to someone or know someone who is serving overseas in the military, and I think we could see a resurgence. I have today learned about the existence of the Bronies, the My Little Pony brothers, and those are men who are
Oh,
who are
yeah. I've heard about this. I heard
yes,
that like
you can see Brony fan fiction.
when they
Now
have
that's
My Little
awesome.
Pony conventions, like
I
where
believe
they they sell the toys and the movies, and they have like convention. They have conventions for everything, but apparently the My Little Pony conventions, you would figure that it would be populated by a lot of little girls that like love
you're
ponies,
so
but it's
right.
it's all older middle-aged guys.
Yes, I believe it, and they are called the Bronies. I did not know that
I
word till
didn't I
today.
didn't know what they were named. The Bronies. That's
They are the
awesome.
bros who like My Little Ponies, and I'm
Bro.
I'm sorry. I'm going to go ahead and judge and say that this to me is right up there with the Bigfoot erotica. I don't personally want to read brony fan fiction based on My Little Ponies. But that is the great thing about digital publishing, self publishing, and Kindle Worlds. There is an audience for it. If there are entire conventions dedicated to My Little Ponies that the bronies like to attend, I am certain that some author with some talent and some ability can actually do well for himself writing these stories and finding an audience who is clamoring for them. More power to them. It's not what I want to read, and we will be reviewing it on Good E-Reader. But
Yeah, totally. You're not going to read about it in our like ebook
I
review of
am
the week.
not going to brony fan fiction. But again, I applaud them if this is what they write and they do it well and they have an audience. Great.
Now, okay, so before I talk about what I want to say, if a brony fan fiction book made like the bestseller list on Amazon, would you review it?
There would be heavy drinking involved, but yes, I would.
Okay. So with this GI Joe fan fiction, I'm a kid of the '80s. I was born in '79, so all in the '80s, I grew up watching GI Joe cartoons, and every episode was Cobra, which is like the enemy, making like a grand master plan to like build a satellite in space to shoot death rays, or to build a colony on the moon, or to take over like the world blood diamond trade. And by the end of the episode they would always lose. GI Joe would always win. i'm
Of
actually
course.
i'm actually very interested at the thought of either writing myself or hopefully petitioning an author friend to write a book where Cobra prevails. I, you know, I
You
my
should.
whole life I wanted Cobra to win. When I watched all the GI Joe cartoons when I was a kid. I watched the two blockbuster movies that have come out in the last few years. I've even read some of the comics. Cobra always loses, and
I
it's like
know.
what I wouldn't give to see Cobra just prevail. Just when the ashen rain is falling from the sky. When everyone's like, when all the Yo-Joes are all like they're too hoarse to say it anymore. Just like Cobra, like Cobra Commander, Destro, they're just like reigning supreme at the end and just like cackling maniacally and just like, finally after like 40 years, we've finally done it. Um,
Exactly. And you just hit exactly on the whole purpose of fan fiction and why it's popular and why I'm thrilled to death that Kindle Worlds is making it possible for people to make money. We had the great news this week. J.K. Rowling came out and said, you know what? I'm really sorry that Ron and Hermione ended up together. I really wish
she
I had not caved.
apologized for
She
it.
did, and she said, and now I'll say, J.K. Rowling has been someone who initially fought fan fiction. She has taken people to litigation
Yep.
over using her characters, and I would love to see her publish her own fan fiction of her work. Give us the book where it's Hermione and Harry instead of Ron and Harry. Now, we may or may not skip the fan fiction many people have published where Ron and Harry get together. But J.K. Rowling has also said that she's always assumed that Dumbledore was homosexual in her mind as she created his character. And that's the really great thing about fan fiction. So not only can Cobra win now, but we can have the genuine romance we should have had all this long, even in the author's mind. I don't know if this was just a decision she made as the author. It did incorporate a very popular character. I think Ginny Weasley got a little more popularity than she originally thought the character would. And so, obviously, since Ron cannot marry Ginny, Harry had to. And so we have, the obvious pairing up of Ron and Hermione and Harry and Ginny. And so I think there she was just giving her readers what they wanted as opposed to what she wanted as the author. I would love to see her do a fan fiction, do an alternate ending book, and I think it would be wildly popular. Even if she only released it in ebook, of course, she owns her digital rights. She's allowed to do that. And a lot of authors who don't own their rights cannot. So I would love to see her create the book that she wanted and that obviously so many fans wanted.
Well, I know that she, after the Harry Potter universe, like after the 8 books or whatever ended, she wrote 2 other books that were actually are getting made into movies.
Mm-hmm.
They're basically about like the creatures and like the magical things of the Harry Potter universe. So
Right.
they'll talk about like the dragon tamers in like Romania and like kind of the creatures they and the centaurs. So they kind of loosely showed them in the movies and kind of talked about them, but they're making a whole movie about sort of like these mystical creatures and like the people from the magic of the place, to capture them or to train them or to go after rogue wizards and stuff like that. So that would be
Right.
interesting. But the prospect of Harry Potter fan fiction, I don't really see that as being a
Yeah.
part of Kindle Worlds anytime soon, because
I don't.
she has too much money, and I don't think that really Amazon has anything to offer her to make her a part of Kindle Worlds.
Right. Except possibly, like I said, maybe this could be where, I would love to see this have been the opening of that door where she says, you know what, I'm the first one in line. Here's my book where I change the ending and the rest of you can follow suit. I don't see that happening anytime soon, especially in the acknowledgement that these were books intended for children and preteens, and there are some inappropriate fan fiction works that have been published that are decidedly not for children. And so I do think she's smart. I respect her for protecting her characters and not just letting anyone play with them and publish whatever they want to. Um, but I think what she's actually come out and announced this last week, I think that's exactly why fan fiction was created, and exactly what you just said about Cobra. Just for fun, just one time, wouldn't it be great if Cobra got to win? You watched him every Saturday, and he lost every Saturday, and every single week he tried again. Wouldn't it be great if one time the poor guy just got to have a small victory,
It's the
even if they
law of
trashed him next
averages,
week?
you know?
Right.
It's like if you, I mean, the definition of a psychotic is doing things the same way, expecting like different results,
Exactly.
and it's like the whole GI Joe premise is just like psychotic, because it's like always trying to like take over the world, to do this, to try it like always the same way, or maybe little fluctuations, and always expecting different results. This time it'll be all different, and it doesn't. And yeah, I'm seriously considering at least writing 1 or 2 pages with like
You should, and you can have your own convention. You guys could be called the GI Bros instead of the Bronies.
oh,
I am all. You are kind of passionate about this.
I think that might be stepping too far. GI Brody.
There you go. You are going to be the leader of the GI
I
Bronies.
could like partner with like the pony people and like make it like
Exactly. Share convention space.
it's like I have a few $100s. Yeah, me too. Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about was actually a very interesting report out of the Netherlands. And this kind of, as a final thing that we talk about, it's very interesting. It's about piracy. And they're saying that in the Netherlands, piracy is like a huge problem. They're saying that ebooks only account for 4.5% of the total revenue that publishers rake in every year, which is a fairly huge number if you consider there's only 16,000 ebooks for sale, and out of that 16,000 ebooks, over 600,000 of them were purchased. So that's a very small pool of titles available, and that's a pretty large figure considering that people have bought that. But piracy is a problem. They were saying that the average Dutch e-reader contains 117 ebooks, 11 of which are paid for.
Wow, that is a small number.
That
But
is, but I mean, Amazon is really wanting to get into the Netherlands.
Mhm,
They really want to set up like a shop there and actually sell books. They
right.
want to do it in Sweden as well. Because these markets are rife with piracy, because there's not a whole lot of frontlist titles available.
Exactly.
If you want to download the latest Stephen King book, or if you want to download the Goldfinch, you won't find it there. You have to pirate it because it's simply not available through traditional channels. And then when, a company like Kobo or Amazon comes around, they go knocking on every single publisher's door saying, guys, you should start digitalizing your whole catalog. We'll make you millions of dollars. And do you really? I think that it's the markets that are untapped that are the highest degree of piracy. Right now, China, Russia, and Vietnam, and now the Netherlands, they pretty well have the largest piracy problems in the world. And
Right.
incidentally, those 4 markets, Amazon, Kobo, Barnes and Noble, Sony, there's none of them in those markets to actually stimulate publisher involvement with bringing their front list titles to ebooks for profit.
Right. We actually had a bigger issue when the digital revolution as we know it actually kicked off, and that was that the governments didn't know how to handle the taxation on ebooks. We saw situations like Germany, where, for example, it was a book and therefore it had to be priced exactly like its print counterpart, but it was also taxed exactly like a software download. So, where I would pay 7% tax for a print book at $10, for example, I had to pay 19% tax on an ebook and still pay the $10 price tag because it was also a book. And, of course, Germany handled that rather quickly and rather well. But I think we're still seeing markets who are just not certain that, first of all, this is going to take off. Why do I bring Parliament together to change the laws when there's only 16,000 titles available and only 4% of the market? We're talking about something that it clearly demonstrates, at least to politicians, that the public's not interested in. And so I think they're not taking into account things like the rampant piracy. You also have the fact that we've proven, of course, J.K. Rowling, back to her, was one of the great examples that when people cannot get a book, they will pirate it. The Harry Potter books, for example. When she finally released the digital editions of those books, which she did one at a time in a maddeningly slow pace, excuse me, it was a relief to readers. People actually came forward and said, now I can buy a copy. I will be happy to give you the money. but I wanted to read it on my e-reader. And so we have a market where people have the expensive device and nothing to put on it. Well, of course I'm going to pirate some books. If I've paid for a tablet or smartphone or a dedicated e-reader and there's nothing to read on it, and you show me a place where I can download some materials, of course I will. Because why did I just spend the money on this, this frivolous purchase, basically?
Yeah, I know. I totally agree. I mean, I would probably say it's, the markets that suffer from the greatest degree of piracy in general, aside from the VAT issues, it's because there's no big major ebook
Mm-hmm.
seller in those countries convincing the
Right,
publishing sector that there's value in digital. And that's a it's a huge issue in itself. And I mean, we could devote an entire podcast to just talking about VATs, where
right,
there's some countries with like a 3% VAT, and that's where, out of Brussels, for instance, or Belgium, and that's where a lot of these companies are basing their European operations out of, and then bypassing the high VAT in the UK and things like that, or in Ireland, by filtering all their sales through these like proxy countries with no VAT.
right,
In France, ebooks have a different VAT than real books. In other countries, real books have a higher VAT than ebooks. So there's really no consistency, and I mean
right,
the European Commission is well aware of this, and they've been in limbo for at least 3 or 4 years trying to resolve this. But it's trying to get every member of the European Union, trying to bring them together on how do we price digital books. I mean, that is a monumental undertaking that will not be resolved anytime soon. It's like the Authors Guild versus Google and book scanning. I mean, how long has that been in court for? For like 6, 7 years already,
right,
with
right.
like no end in sight, basically. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of details, but we hope that you guys have enjoyed this rambling diatribe filled edition of the Goody Reader Radio Show. We've talked
Go
about,
GI Joe.
yeah, go Joe. We've been talking about a lot of subjects today. If you have any ideas for future episodes of the show, drop a comment. And if you're listening to the show on iTunes, Soundhound, or various other channels, go to goodyreader.com, click on the radio tab, and you could listen to all of our other shows. And for goodyreader.com, my name is Michael, and I've been joined today by senior editor of Goody Reader, Mercy Pilkington. Mercy, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everybody, take care.